Okay, so today we're going to start by cutting out a pattern and then turning it into a dress. I apologize if I get interrupted, my kids are floating around. We're going to start with a store-bought pattern just because it's something you can go and buy yourself. This is New Look 6507. It's an off-the-shoulder dress. I've already got the pattern itself cut out. We're going to be pinning it. So one thing I want to point out is I am actually using an old thrift store bed sheet. You will find if you watch any of these videos I'm making that I really tend to like thrift store bed sheets for several reasons. One, they've been washed a bunch of times already, so you don't have to worry about them shrinking. Two, there's a whole lot of fabric there for very little money. This pattern for what we're making would call for 4 5/8 yards of fabric, which, you know, we're talking 5 yards of fabric, so even if you got that at $5 a yard, you're talking $25, where I paid, I think, $3 for this sheet. So I like bed sheets. They're also really wide. They carry a lot of fabric in them, so you can do a lot with one sheet. You just have to be creative as to how you put it together. So I'm going to be pinning and cutting this out. I am making view A, but with the length of view B. All right, this is for my daughter. And I tend to, in the case of like her, is I'll make it larger and then tailor it to fit her later. So for now, we're making the size extra large. My fabric's already folded in half. I'm going to be lining piece number 1 up right along the edge, and I'm going to pin it. If you're new to sewing, you'll know that if you leave your pattern as close, if you don't pick it up, leave it as much on the table as you can, you'll have much more even pinning, so your fabric won't have a chance to shift underneath. So if you can avoid picking your fabric up when you pin it, do that. I hope you guys can hear me. This is my first video I am doing, and I'm going to have some fabulous people hopefully speed this whole process of me pinning and cutting up, so we'll see. At least after I'm done explaining myself. It is about 100 degrees out here, but I don't have room inside. I normally work in a studio, but due to COVID, my studio is currently closed, which is one of the reasons I am doing these videos, so that my clients, who I usually work with, have the opportunity to see some of the work I do start to finish from here. So there's my first piece pinned. Now, you could cut this out at this point. However, I definitely recommend not, because if you get to a point where you find you don't have enough fabric and you need to rearrange how it's all on here, well, then you're able to. So I'm going to just fold my fabric over and move it up. I am working on two 2-foot by 4-foot folding tables that we got at Costco, because again, my studio is currently unoccupied due to COVID. Now, my fabric is the same either direction, so I can really turn my pattern pieces any direction. But if you have a print or whatever, you need to make sure that you are, in fact, following the grain and the pattern so that you have your image going all one direction. This is going to be my daughter's dress based on, we're going to model it after Rapunzel, hence why it's the pretty lavender color that Disney's Tangled. So we'll probably end up getting her some sort of a cute little yellow flower to go in her hair or something. Maybe later on put some of the little Rapunzel kind of the Corona flags on it. If you did not know, Corona is the name of Rapunzel's kingdom. Appropriate. Also, if you're using sheets, even if you don't want to use them for your outer fabric, because, you know, if they're plain, they're boring, whatever, sheets make amazingly good lining as well. Which, you know, if nobody's ever going to see it, who the heck cares what it looks like? Depends on what you're making, obviously, but for me, making theatrical costumes most of the time, nobody's ever going to see the lining of a bodice, so if it's got, you know, Jake and the Neverland Pirates on it, who cares? Alright, so those are my first two main pieces pinned on. And as you can see, we barely come to the end here, but I have a whole lot of fabric that direction. For this pattern, I'm going to find the rest of my pieces. I'm going to let that unroll. I'm going to pause this for a minute and I'll get the rest of my pieces out, okay? Okay, so now I have the rest of my pattern pieces picked out. This piece is piece number 6. It's my elastic band. This is going to be the elastic that goes around the shoulders. I'm going to go ahead and put that away for now because I'm not going to need it yet. So now I have to cut out my shoulder ruffles and shoulder straps. So this is my upper flounce, my lower flounce, and then my shoulder straps. As I said before, I do not have to go in this fabric. I can work either way for the grain lines, so I can turn this one sideways. Otherwise, it would have had to have been up and down. But that's solely based on this fabric. So you have to work with whatever fabric you have. If you're ever in doubt, put them all the same direction. Now, when you're putting down a piece of pattern and you're not exactly sure where it's going to lay, or in my case, I'm outside and the wind is blowing, line up your grain line, which is these arrows, and just put a pin in it right there, and then you're going to push out everywhere from there. Now, if you want, you could, instead of doing an upper flounce and a lower flounce in the same color, you could, if you wanted to get really cute, maybe on your lower flounce, do something that's peekabooing out the bottom in a different color, or maybe some lace on your top flounce so that the color from underneath shows through. Whatever, be creative. It is your project, and don't let anyone tell you you can't do it. Ultimately, sewing is kind of paint by numbers, okay? So if you're and my goal with these videos is to show you guys it can be made easier and not to think of it as so daunting. For years, I just sort of started sewing stuff together and prayed as to what was going to happen. It is entirely your patience and your desire to make it amazing that is what changes things. I've been sewing for almost 30 years now, starting when I was 10. I'm aging myself. But I still tell people I didn't start getting good until I was probably, or at least where I felt I was getting good, until I was probably, you know, 30. And that was because my desire to get things done changed to my desire to get things done and have them be amazing. So, there you go. Alright, so we have all our pieces pinned, and now I'm going to cut them out. Alright, so we are all done cutting out our pieces for this McCall's pattern. I will be back later to sew it with you guys. A couple things real quick though on the patterns that I want to talk about is, if you look up real close here, you'll notice you got these little notches. These ultimately are so they're like a puzzle piece, so you know where to put things together. I personally do not use those when I sew. You can. If you're new to sewing, you should. However, most people will notch, they're called notches, they will go cut them into the fabric. Don't do that. Always cut out. The reason being, if you find that your project is too small and you need to make your seam allowance shorter, you will end up at the point where you can't do that if you notch inward. So if you're going to notch, notch outward. If I find that people need me to go over what the different symbols on your patterns mean, we'll go over that later. But for now, that's cutting out our first pattern. Okay? All right, we'll talk to you guys in a few.